precious metals and, yeah, enamel. It's incredible. So anyway, without any further ado, take it away, Sue.
Okay. I'll start out with a plug for the AAW Scholarship Program. Every year, Arrowmont and John C. Campbell Folk School each give 14 scholarships for a one-week class to the AAW. The scholarship is for the tuition only. You're still responsible for your travel and room and board. But each year, the chapters of AAW put in a list of their AAW members who are interested in participating and send those off to AAW National. And they have a drawing for these 28 scholarships. So this year I won a John C. Campbell Folk School scholarship. And when I got the paperwork, I had gone through the catalog online. They sent a catalog with your paperwork. By that time, Trent Bosch's class was already full, so I didn't see Trent Bosch. But there was still an opening in Dixie Biggs. Dixie was here probably 2014, 2015. She did a one-day demo and a one-day hands-on class, and I took the one-day hands-on class, and I bought the Carver stuff then. And so this time it was the 5-day class. You cover a lot more ground than you did. What she's known for is carvings. Do these show up? We were kind of figuring that if we did the overhead, you'd be able to zoom in better on it. So these are done from actual leaves. We got to walk around John C. Campbell Folk School and pick some leaves that we liked. She wanted at least 2 to overlap so we could learn the overlap, and then the other one I added on to get kind of a swirling effect. And I'll be talking about doing some of this kind of carving with the micromotor tonight. The other thing that you work on while you're there is this fellow. Well, we can back off a little bit, I think. The steps and the clover and this piece and this were all done with the micromotor. But this is done with your trusty Dremel tool and one of the round stone burrs that you frequently have coming with the kits when they arrive. And you just drive it in, turn it up on high and drive it in, and it burns a little hole in there, and that's what the black dots are. They're burned. But by friction, not by heat, or not with a wood-burning tool. And with this, you don't want to use the micromotor because you'll burn it out doing that. The Dremel tools and the big Fordham motors are much more geared to handle that kind of thing. And then this piece is done with those Dremel engravers you can buy at Home Depot cheap. We were using a Zentangle book for ideas, and you have to press harder than I did because you engrave the lines first, and then you dye the area, and then you put a finish on it, and the last thing you do is add liming wax, which is white or black. And if you've done a deep line, it'll be a very strong white, very strong black. I have a little strong white and a little strong black, but a lot of kind of wimpy white because I didn't engrave my lines deep enough. I have a light hand with a pen, and I run into these things whenever you're supposed to press hard on something. And so there are other kinds of power carving. If you want to do the piercing work like Jerry McMaster does, that's a whole different tool, and it runs at higher speed. There's also an angle carver, and I have never tried one and don't plan to get into anything big enough to need to try one of those. So, from a safety standpoint, this thing spins at about 35,000 RPM, and it creates an enormous amount of really fine dust. So they recommend that you, with any power tool, you should be wearing safety glasses. I've always had clip-on, flip-up magnifiers to go with my safety glasses for jewelry and enameling work, so that works fine for me for this as well. And then you need some kind of a dust mask, a fairly determined dust mask. So we were wearing the dust begons in class, but Dixie was also showing us this. This is an ellipse dust mask, which is made in Britain, and I'd seen them advertised in Woodturning magazine, and they are available here now. Packard Woodworks carries them. I think Woodcraft, you can order them. I don't know if they have them in the store. Craft Supplies doesn't seem to have picked them up yet. They come with a set of filters that are for dust, but they also have a nuisance fumes filter that has charcoal in along with the dust filter, and Dixie uses those when she's using the wood burner to keep the smoke out of her nose. And so, turning considerations, typically Dixie does turns a vessel. You need a thick wall starting out. About 3/8 of an inch is what she recommends if you're doing an overall design the way she usually does. And a lot of that is going to be carved away because at least 1/8 of an inch, possibly a little more, is going to go so that you have the relief carving on the top. If you're interested in doing a band, I don't know if Jack can get up the picture of her cherry blossom vessels. That's the one with the black background and the pink flowers. Oh, it was the one before there. But this is one of her overall things, and everybody knows the clovers, if you've ever seen Dixie's work. And the maple leaves she's good at, too. She typically does color hers so that they don't all. But this one I'm talking about, the cherry blossoms, up at the top, that one. Those, she turns a thinner vessel, but she has a band right where the carving is going to go so that she doesn't have to get everything smoothed out in the areas where she's just taking out background. She's done that on the lathe already. Now, the pieces that I turned, in case we had time to work on them, I had only made in the thick wall, so I don't have... Doing this over, I would probably do the thin band for where I wanted the carving to go, and then get all the shape in on the lathe. But we didn't have... It was too late to do that after I found out about that. So, and holding the piece for carving, Dixie finishes her turning completely, and then she uses she actually signs these. She uses a sandbag with a shelf liner on top of it to keep things from sliding. It works well for bigger pieces. A piece as small as the one I'll be working on tonight, you can hold in your hand and don't need to do much with. If you leave the tenon on the piece, you don't finish the bottom. You can leave it in the chuck. You can use the lathe to hold the piece, and you can turn there. Trent Bosch also has a stand that lets you turn it in several degrees of freedom while you're doing your carving, and there's at least one third party that has another version of that. So tonight we'll just be working on this one. The first thing you have to do is come up with the lines for where you want things to happen. And these were penciled on this afternoon. It'll eventually have something similar on the other side, but for tonight we're only looking at the one. And when we were laying this out, I was wondering if she had some kind of a template that she does all these with. No, you plant your hand on it, you draw it in pencil, and then you cut it out with the ball burr. So we got some practice at planting the hand and turning an arc. So now we put on our trusty safety glasses. I don't know if I'm going to have this on tonight because it'll argue with the microphone. So let's check and make sure this turns on. Should be a little bit faster. Now these come, this is a micromotor. Your rheostat is in here. This adjusts your speed and it has your on-off switch. But the motor is actually in here so that your wire coming out here is much less inclined to argue with you than the cable that goes to a Fordham motor, because their motor is up there and you just have a handpiece. And this comes with a collet for 1/8 inch that's screwed. 1/8 inch shafts that's screwed in already, and then an adapter that takes it down to 3/32. All of the bits that Dixie uses for the class are 3/32, so you don't have to switch the collet out. There is also an adapter for 1/16 inch bits for those of us who have those things. And her famous bit is this one. It's a 5mm bud burr, and this is the unmodified one, so it'll cut all the way down to the tip. But she also modifies a version of this where she cuts off the end of it so she has a flat piece with no grip to it, and that lets you move around working on side without damaging the flat background that you want to keep there. Can you zip in anymore?
Jack, does this one work? Just don't move. Don't move. George Randy said it did. We'll take a donated camera.
There we go. So that's the 5mm bud burr. Now this morning I had my modified one and I was putting it in the box so I'd have it here tonight, and it disappeared. It wasn't where it came from, and it wasn't where I was putting it, and it wasn't anywhere in between. So probably once the demo is over, it will show up again. But I don't have one to show you tonight. She does the same thing, though, with another burr, which is a little harder to see. But one has an end that cuts, and the other has a shiny end that doesn't cut. So you can get into places without making a mess that you weren't planning to. And then when you want to get serious amounts of wood removed in a hurry, you get out the saber tooth.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you buy your burrs and supplies for those things?
MDI wood carvers. Yes. They actually track when Dixie is having classes so that they will always have the things she asks for in stock when students are asking for it at the last minute. And I do have an envelope here with the list. I don't have copies to give out, but you can take a phone photo of it if you want. So you start out with a 2mm ball burr, which you can barely see, but this is where you're going to outline the places where you're going to cut. You do a shallow cut first because if you want to correct it, when it's shallow, you still have an opportunity. Once you get the deep cut in, it's a lot harder to try to amend a mistake. So now the steel cutters go at high speed, which is about 2/3 of the way on in the dial here. We also have an assortment of diamond burrs, and those are used largely as sanding. So you do your initial cutting, and then when you're going to smooth it out, you turn the speed down and you use the diamond. And then when you want to get to the point where you're sanding in the background and getting into tight places, she has a make-your-own miniature sanding burr, and that goes on really slow speed because you're basically making this yourself. You take the Scotch foam mounting tape, take a strip of it and attach it to sandpaper, and then you cut out these little discs with a 3/8-inch leather punch. And they work very well if you're careful. If you go too fast or press too hard, they pop off real quick. So typically you make a whole bunch of little discs so you can replace them as needed. Okay.
So, Sue, tell us again what you're doing, what
This is
you're
our
trying to do, and
This is our 2mm ball burr, and I'm outlining where I've penciled my lines earlier. And you want to be just outside the line of what's your center. I'm planning to do this frame effect as steps like these. So here, just outside the line is actually inside for the shape that I'm making. You will notice as you're working around that as you go through side grain versus end grain, you get a little bit different effect. But that's the advantage of using the ball burr, that you get the shallow line in first, and then you can correct anything that didn't go quite right the first time, and where something's deep and the thing next to it is not deep, you can adjust that before you get into the next phase. Typically with these, the faster you go, the more smooth effect you get with the cutters. With the diamond, you don't want to go that fast. You want to slow down a little bit so you're sanding rather than cutting. But if it seems like you're going too slow and getting kind of a choppy effect, the speed is probably not quite high enough. When you're going back and forth between one kind of bit and another kind of bit, you turn it down for the diamond, then you go back to a cutter and you don't always remember that you've got to turn the speed back up. Now when I get to the leaves, I'm definitely going to be on the outside of the line because I want the wood to be up where the line is. Now when Dixie does her outlining, she doesn't go into the interior at all until she's gone all the way around the outside and cut back the background a bit. So right now there are two leaves and they overlap, but they're just all one solid piece for now. I think the cutting is deep enough around the leaves for where I want to go right now. So I will probably pick up one of my cylinder burrs and start working the background back. This is where the safety edge on the cylinder burr comes in handy because you want to cut around that line at an angle but not accidentally take out your outline. Now, as you're going around cutting out the background, you generate a lot of dust, and it settles into the places that you've cut, and that's where you take your trusty toothbrush and scrub it out so you can actually see what you're doing. It's the high-tech solution here. Cherry. Now, once you get further back from the outline, you don't need to use such a small burr. You can get the this is where your bud burr comes in. Now, it takes quite a while to get the whole background cut out, so we're not going to do that before we start in on the leaves, or we won't be out of here by 9. So now we come back in with our ball burr and we start working on the leaves. And Dixie has you work off real leaves because she wants to impress you with the fact that leaves aren't flat. They look sort of flat, but if you look at them closely, they have places where they twist up and twist down. And if you want your leaves to look fairly realistic, then you've got to be able to identify where they go up and where they go down and cut them accordingly. There's a temptation to go in and cut your veins in the leaf first, but in order to get the leaf to look more realistic, you need to deal with the ups and downs in the leaf first, and once you've got the shapes correct, then you go in and add the veins. That depends on where you're working with the leaf. I did have a real one with me here, but which I've probably lost somewhere on the table. If if you look at a leaf on the top, the veins are generally depressed. If you look at the leaf on the underside, they're raised. So if you're doing your leaf as an underside, the backside of the leaf, then you need to raise your veins. So. Incidentally, depending on what you're doing, sometimes it's easiest to hold the tool in as if you were writing, and other times, depending on what you're trying to do, it's easier to do an overhand grip so you can put your thumb down on the edge. So consider it part of the process. Well, your feet get tired if you do this for a long time. But I started out as a lab rat, so I've done a lot of standing. Now, right now, I'm lowering the leaf that's going to be underneath so that the top leaf stands out more. And I'm making a shallow depression on the top leaf so that this part looks a little bit more down compared to the other parts of the leaf. But keeping the edge standing up. And the reason that they build these stands with many degrees of freedom is because you don't hold it in one place and try to move everything around. You keep turning the piece to give you the best access to what you're trying to do right then. Then once you've gotten to the general idea of where you want things to be, and you want to sand a smoother surface, you whip out your handy-dandy, you turn the dial way down, then you turn on the little sander. You can probably do a little bit better. I think this will go to 45,000, and this is about 10% of it, so maybe 4,500.
Awfully quiet. It's nice.
Now, in this case, these are holly leaves, and they're smooth and shiny, so I'm not going to be texturing the leaf. But if you were going to do a textured leaf, like the big one here, and you can all come up and see these later, so it's not lost on the camera, you would smooth this out with the sandpaper first so you get a continuous surface, and then go in and texture it. Mm-hmm.
We often talk about sharpening, and I'm wondering how long do those burrs last? Do you notice them, noticeably get duller, or is that not a concern?
I haven't had that problem because I haven't done a whole lot of it. Dixie probably goes through several a year.
So you get, they're pretty decent
Yeah.
life out of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are steel, and there are some carbide ones, but the steel ones you can modify on the grinding wheel. I don't think she'd recommend doing the carbide ones that way. So, having taken that off, now we go back to the ball burr yet again. So that we can cut our lines. Now, we've lost the lines for the veins that I did earlier, and get all that excess dust out. So if one had a pencil handy, one would probably draw the line where you wanted it and indicate where those are. I'm going to eyeball it right now. It's a small leaf. Now, when you're cutting things and you're not going to sand afterward because it's either something like this or it's the texture you've put in, there's something else that you can use to smooth the excess hairs out. This is my cache of jewelry tools. You have the options of the 3M miniature wheels, or you can use Scotch-Brite on a wheel. Unfortunately, this is pickier about... No, I guess that's 1/8. Now this is another turn the wheel way down. And then you can go over it and get rid of the excess little hairs that stick up. And we can do a little bit of texturing in the background so you see how that's done. These are actually done with the ball burrs. Ball burrs come in different sizes, so we'll use a little bit bigger one than our outlining tool. Turn the speed back up. Oops. We need the collet adapter back. Sometimes this feels like arguing with me, and it's going to do it now because it's in a demo. No. It twists. It's just not interested in twisting at the moment. But basically, using the ball burr, some textures are accomplished. Everything is sticking. Just bringing the ball in and making multiple dots next to each other. The background that I used on this one was done with the ball burr, but I was trying to get an effect of motion, so it was more long stripes against it. This leaf is the dot texture, and then this is the stripe texture. So, any questions? If you wanted to paint at this point, you could do that. Dixie does paint most of hers. A lot of people have seen the clover, and she doesn't lay that all out up front. She takes the single piece that's going to be the on top piece, outlines it, pulls the background back a little bit, then draws in what's going to go around it, outlines those, pulls the background out a little bit, and then draws the next ones to go in.
Show it to the camera.
Which camera? There. So that way you get overlapping clover, but you can adjust it as needed as you go along rather than try to fix it all up front and then decide you changed your mind. Her early works, she had tried laying things like that out all at once and discovered that wasn't the greatest idea. She had us do our first clover as a single piece, so we got our experience carving the primary one. This one was mine, and then this was her demo piece, which I wanted a drawing at the end of it. So her texture is a lot stronger than mine is. But at the display at the end of the workshop at John C. Campbell, they put the entire classes together, and it looked like a field of clover, and they were sufficiently similar to be impressive.
What kind of paint does she use for color?
The paints like this, she uses acrylic paint. The little bottles you get at the crafts store. These were fabric dyes. The ones under the liming wax. those ones, the wild colors.
Like
And
dye,
fabric dye.
like red.
No, these were little bottles that she had that are apparently for people who do silk dyeing. And then if you have a leaf that you really like the shape of, there's the missing leaf. So if you look at this, it has ups, it has downs. You have to, if it's holly, you have to watch those points. They will stick you.
Anybody needs any extra leaves? I got a whole yard.
But what she'll do if she's going to do a vessel and she wants very similar leaves, she'll do a pattern. This is the drafting cover stuff for those who've had. It's if you get it at Blick, it's FICO, and it's intended to cover a drafting board. But it cuts out really well. It gives you a thick edge to draw lines around. And you can get consistent leaves. And if you want mirror images, you'd trace one side, flip it over, and trace the other, and you've got mirror images. Okay, any questions?
What was the most difficult part of what you learned, during the class that you think we should watch out for? Mistake-wise.
I found it difficult to get my background smooth, particularly when you're going in with the saber tooth. You wind up with a whole bunch of scratched lines in it. Then you have to go in and do a lot of cutting back and sanding. When we did the class here, she wasn't real specific about how to deal with it other than use the diamond burrs. But now she has you get a ruby stone, and that does a good job of sanding before you get down to the diamond size.
Sue, have you ever taken a class at Aramont?
I've never taken a class at Aramont.
I'm just curious what.
I've been to Aramont several times for other events occurring there.
What the difference is between Aramont and then J.C. Campbell, if there is a difference.
I'm afraid my feeling was John C. Campbell was a little too folksy for me. They have you get up for morning song in the morning, and you're supposed to really enjoy Appalachian music and dancing. And the entire wood turning group decided that they would go back to the turning studio and work till 9 o'clock rather than attend the entertainment.
Yeah, that was a benefit when you, at Aramont, for instance, because I took my class with Dixie out in Colorado at an individual's house, and we could only work till 5 o'clock at night. At Aramont, you can go eat, and as long as there's another person in the shop, you can work till midnight, which is a tremendous advantage if you're really wanting to.
At John C. Campbell, they insisted that you have either the instructor or the assistant present. So if they were willing to go back,
So you had to have.
you had to have,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And Dixie was willing to go back after dinner till 9 o'clock. And so that was when we worked till. But at that point, going back to the dormitory building, they don't want you walking on the main highway. Brasstown Road is an old U.S. highway and doesn't have sidewalks along it. You're supposed to take these paths through the woods, which you really can't see at night. And the first time I ever heard of John C. Campbell was from a member of the Enamelist Society who had gone there for an enamel workshop and had tripped and fallen in the paths at night and broke her ankle. And so I tended to drive from the residence hall up to the dining hall parking lot. I'd walk the open path from the turning studio down to that parking lot, and then I'd drive back because I wasn't going to go into the woods and take these paths that go up and down, and you can't tell it from the paths over on the side. Aramont does have a little bit better defined. They're not on a major highway through the middle of the campus, and you can find it at night in the dark without any problem.
Did you see a bear?
We didn't see any bears here. We did hear wolves howl or coyotes howling at night.
You and Ann for the women in woodturning, the bear that came and visited. And
Yes, well, that was at Aramont.
Yeah, we saw a bear. It was even in our picture. They photoshopped it in.
Great. Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, we have one last piece of business we need to take care of with Sue. And that is, what's going to be the challenge for January?
It will be a vessel with some kind of carving on it.
Okay.
You, if you prefer to do things like the dots or just an outline, that's fine. If you want to be more elaborate, that's fine too.
There you have it, folks. The challenge is a carving. So, with that, we are going to move in.